wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic. Welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast. My name is Steve, coming to you from very, very hot Conway, Arkansas. And I'm joined this week by Donald Robertson. If you don't know, Donald is a cognitive behavioral psychotherapist, a fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health, a founding member of modern Stoicism, author of several books, including How to Think Like a Roman Emperor and Stoicism and the Art of Happiness. He is also the president of the Plato's Academy Center, which I hope we'll talk more about in a bit. Welcome to the show, Donald.
Well, thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to join you once again in conversation. I'm looking forward to our chat. And I should say, I mentioned I'm in Montreal today, so I'm speaking to you, your listeners from Montreal.
I've spoken to you. I think you've been in Greece. I think you were in Austria once. Yeah, you've been all around, perhaps researching this book. I don't know.
Yeah, I was researching it, but yeah, in Greece and Austria. Like as it happens, that is indeed what I was doing.
Excellent. So let's just start. You have a new book out called The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. Well, I guess the title is Verissimus. I want to say Verissimus because my Latin teacher would yell at me for saying the V, but Verissimus. This is a big shift from your past work. This is a graphic novel. How did you come up with this idea?
By accident. All good ideas. I think what actually happened was that there was an illustrator in Portugal called Zeno Fraga, and he just messaged me out of the blue. I've told this story a couple of times on podcasts, and I think, I've never bothered to ask Zé why he contacted me. So I keep thinking, make a mental note. I must go back and ask him why he contacted me. But he contacted me out of the blue, and he done a graphic novel of an Aristophanes play called The Assembly Women, which is a classical Greek satire. And he kind of got talking to me, and I thought, yeah, that's interesting. And people contact me about a lot of kind of stuff that I'd never get a chance to follow up on. So I kind of forgot about it. And then like 6 months or a year or something later, I was just thinking I could do like a little mini webcomic. And I thought, I'll message that guy in Portugal. And we got talking. And so we did these 3 little kind of 10-panel mini comics, a little series of 3.
Yeah.
With Marcus Aurelius. And each one is centered around one of Aesop's fables. And it has Marcus Aurelius talking about stuff from the meditation. So it's kind of a cool concept. I guess they're more suitable for teaching philosophy to kids. And we never intended to do that much with it, except to put it on the internet as to promote courses that I was running and stuff. And then there was a whole sequence of weird events that basically led to me printing 3 of the panels as Giclée prints, like sort of fine art, high quality prints. And I exhibited them at a conference in London, a Stoicon conference. And a guy who is a senior editor for a major publisher saw them and said, have you ever thought of doing a graphic novel? Do you have any more of these? And I showed him the webcomics. And he said, do you want to do a graphic novel about Socrates? And I said, I think that would be quite difficult. Weirdly, I said, no, that's going to be too difficult because Socrates is very wordy and very ambiguous, and it doesn't lend itself that well to a graphic novel. But Marcus Aurelius would be far easier because the Stoics are kind of like the bullet point version. So he tends to speak in pithier aphorisms, and there's a lot more action involved in the story, so it'd be easier to do as a graphic novel. And he went, that's spot on, that's exactly my thinking, and that's why we did it. Now, having done that, I've changed my mind, and I think actually that although that seemed like a really convincing argument at the time, I think there is a way of doing a graphic novel about Socrates. It's taken me about 3 years to figure that out, but now I kind of think there might be a kind of angle that would make it work a bit better. But that's how we ended up getting a book deal. And then I started working on it. And, when you do a book proposal, they ask me all these questions, and you do a fairly detailed proposal. But at no point did anyone say, Donald, have you ever read a graphic novel? Right. Because the answer to that would have been, I don't think so. Like, I don't remember. Like, maybe I've kind of flicked through one or something. And then we started working on it, and I thought I should go and read some graphic novels. So I started reading them in the library, and I think this is a sign of genius on my part. This is the sign of a truly either a complete idiot, possibly, or a great artist, or so like somewhere in between. But I was reading all these. I had a pile of graphic novels, and my friends were like, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "I have to go work all day in the library." And they're like, "Oh, geez, what are you doing?" I said, "I've got to read loads of graphic novels." And they're like, "That's not work. Like, that's my job. I have to do it." Like, and so I started reading them, and I just couldn't get into any of the ones I was looking at. There were one or two that were sort of okay, but I thought, I'm not really into this. And so I read I thought, okay, I need to approach this differently. I read a bunch of books, but there are a surprising number of books about how to write a graphic novel.
Huh.
So the
Never
best
would
one
have thought that.
is Scott McCloud's Making Comics, incidentally, which I read cover to cover like 3 times. It's like my Bible. It's great. And then there's a bunch of other books that I read about how to write graphic novels. And at some point, I kind of thought, I'm not getting that much inspiration somehow from reading other graphic novels and stuff. And what I did was switch to studying movies and TV shows that were Sword and Sandals. So I went back and rewatched every Sword and Sandals thing that I could think of, like that Cleopatra thing with Liz Taylor that goes on for like 4 hours or whatever it is.
Oh yeah,
and like you name it, I sat through everything.
I'm sure you watched with the fall of the Roman Empire with
Marcus Aurelius in it.
Yeah,
the old one from the late 60s. But yeah, I watched that twice, I think. Like, and it's quite good actually. I always kind of think, oh, this is better than I thought it was going to be. And then I found some really obscure ones that I watched as well. And I got a lot more inspiration from watching movies. So then that affected the style, because you could do a graphic novel that is literally little stick men talking if you wanted.
Sure.
Well, that's not Z's style anyway. So because I was getting more inspiration from movies and stuff, I thought we'll do it in a more cinematic style. And I guess then that shaped the approach that we took to writing the script. It took probably 6 months to write the script, which is pretty quick. And then I thought it would take like a year to do the book, because you normally get a year to do a book. And I was talking to a guy called Alakos Papadotos, who is the illustrator for a best-selling graphic novel called Logicomics, which is about Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and the history of modern logic. And he just kind of like casually mentioned in the conversation that there were like about 4 of them that worked on that, and it took them 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
He said, and my jaw kind of dropped, and I thought we would maybe get it done in a year. It took us 2 or 3 years in the end, and that was working really, fairly systematically with a lot of monthly deadlines and, doing things to try and kind of speed up the production. But it still took like 2 or 3 years. But it's quite a large graphic novel. It's 230 pages or something, and it's full color as well. So it took longer than it would if it was like 100 pages in black and white. And then you can make a decision about, do you want it to be historically accurate, or do you not really care about that? And we decided we were going to try and make it as historically accurate as we could. Although we've also got some like fantasy elements in it and stuff. So we had consultants that we spoke to about some of the history and language and philosophy, and a guy that was an advisor on the legionary armor and other historical details. The first thing he told us was Zé had already done all the sketches, and then you go back and ink it and color it and stuff. And so the consultant went through the entire thing and told us that all the swords were the wrong length, because he said he was convinced that at this point in history they started to use the spatha rather than the gladius, because it's better for fighting cavalry, apparently. If you ever want to know that, like,
I'll write that down.
I can't reach this guy with my gladius, like, a slightly longer sword. And so I think it's a bit ambiguous, but they probably started doing that. So Zé had to go through all the part and make the swords like an inch or 2 longer or whatever it was, which was kind of annoying. And then the other thing that we didn't think of, which is now obvious, is that Bonomancius, the advisor that we had, said, some of these legionaries are holding the sword in the wrong hand. And we're like, and he's like, they would always hold it in the right hand, because you can't have like a formation where some of the legionaries are holding their sword in the right hand and the guy next to him is kind of doing it the other way around. And so like they all have to, every single one of them always fights with the right hand. And we were like, oh man. So we have a scene where maybe there's like one legionary in his own or something like that, and we had to redo the whole panel.
Wow.
A number of and things like that. So, but you know, it's all fun and games, and most people probably won't even notice. But
well, that guy that'll email you at 3 a.m, he'll notice, right?
Somebody will email me and say the things that people complain the most about with historical accuracy, in my experience, are the things that are actually accurate, weirdly. And then usually afterwards you think, oh, that's a bit wrong, or we took a bit of a liberty there. And those are the things that no one ever notices or complains about. And they'll get really hung up on things that you go, that thing is straight out of Cassius Dio or what, like, and they're like, that can't be true, it's impossible. Like, so historians are weird. Like we were talking earlier about, sometimes people get kind of argumentative about things and stuff. And I think historians are kind of more argumentative than philosophers in a way.
Wow.
Like in my experience, you know, like they'll just be like, that can't be true. That's wrong. And then they love kind of getting in these debates. We shared a draft of the map that we were doing to a Roman history forum, and they spent ages like debating it with each other about where the border of different provinces would be and stuff. And I went through and read through all of the comments we had, and I reckon at least 3/4 of them were wrong. Like, but these were guys that were like total history buffs, and they were like, this should be there and this should be there. And I was like, some of them will give us really good advice, but most of them were like, no, that's like, you're talking about what it looked like 200 years earlier or something. That's not accurate. Huh. But it was fun. And so we tried to get the visuals accurate. We tried to get the speech accurate. Mm-hmm. So I won't name who this is by, but like, well, there's one, I guess like there's movies that are like this as well, where they'll have Romans or Greeks or whatever, and they'll be talking and using language that sounds like a modern, like American slang,
right?
Like, and just seems really kind of incongruous to me. So we tried to kind of put a bit more effort, and then a good source for that is we have some of Marcus Aurelius' his private letters, right? And so then you get to see things like how he might swear an oath, how he might express surprise, how just figures of speech that he uses, how he expresses affection, how he greets his teachers, how they greet him. And that gives us an idea of what informal conversation might actually have sounded
like by Hercules or whatever they say.
They say by Hercules quite a lot. Yeah, that's one of their favorite ones.
That's interesting. Yeah. I was going to ask before we go any further, how do you write a script? How do you write a script? You know, I'm trying to visualize this process. Mm-hmm. This is a very image heavy book, and then you have text. You write text and assume, okay, maybe this sentence will be one panel and this sentence will be another. How do you approach that?
There's different ways of writing scripts for a graphic novel. Like, I feel like I know a lot about graphic novels now. Like, also, this is a paradox that I think maybe people I'm the sort of person, I'll find myself in a situation where I don't know how to do something, and then I'll go away and frantically try and learn how to do it. And then after having done it, I'll go and look at graphic novels other people have done, and I'll think, half of these guys don't seem to know any of the stuff that half of them haven't read any of the books about like the methods and stuff like that. So it's like a lot of people just kind of wing it or whatever. And I was like, I'm frantically trying to figure out what's the craft here.
Sure.
So you could write a script that's just like, he said this, he said this, he said this, and then give it to the artist and go, there you go, buddy, sort that out. Like, and some comics were written in the past in a very kind of schematic way like that, and the illustrators had to do a lot of the heavy lifting, like figuring out what the action would look like and really constructing a storyboard. And other scripts are far more detailed, right down to, so our script's pretty detailed. Maybe I'm interfering or whatever in the book, but we wrote it more like a pretty detailed script, including camera angles. So we'd say, you know, this is an over the shoulder shot, or this is a full shot from a low angle or a high angle.
So you had a vision for a lot of these.
And we described what's going on in the foreground and what's going on in the background. Like having kind of like half seriously said I hadn't read any graphic novels. The one thing that kind of saves me there is that when I was a kid, I was about 14 or 15, I read religiously every week a British comic called 2000 AD. And 2000 AD was this kind of training ground for guys that went on to do graphic novels and stuff. And it was a slightly more adult kind of sci-fi thing. It had Judge Dredd in it and stuff like that. And I read that religiously when I was a kid. So that all kind of came flooding back to me. And one of the things I loved was the artwork was kind of almost like heavy metal or prog rock album sleeves. And there were like little details in the background that you could spend ages just kind of like spotting. So we tried to, when we were describing a scene, I'd be like, there's two dogs fighting in the background. And Zé would be like, why? You know?
Just do it, man.
Just do it, man. It kind of mirrors like what's happening. It symbolizes what's going on in a dialogue or something. But I learned some technical stuff that was useful. Like I didn't want it to be just a big spiel about philosophy. I thought that would be boring if it was just two guys in sandals and
sitting on a couch going, gee, there are some things there are some things in our control and some things that are not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wanted more action. So we tried really hard to using a number of strategies, really. So one is that Marcus are really, this is a long story, but there are methodological reasons why stylistic reasons why the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius is written in a weird way, so that it's kind of it's pretty abstract.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of book 2, he says, every morning when you wake up, tell yourself you're going to meet meddlesome and treacherous people and yada, yada, yada. Doesn't name any of them, obviously, right? So he says it in a very vague way. You might think, oh, that's like the guy I work with, or it's like my mother-in-law or whatever. But it's also, as a historian, you're kind of like, who's he talking about though?
I want more detail.
Like spill the beans, Mark. Like, who is it that you're thinking about? Is this, Avidius Cassius? Is it your wife? Is it Commodus? Is it the Germans? Like, who are these people?
The Germans.
Yeah, there's all these German tribes and stuff. But I'd love to know. And there's other places where he'll use vivid imagery, but he tends to turn it. He'll talk about the gladiators fighting and things like that, and he'll use that as a kind of metaphor for philosophy. Now, if you try really hard, you can go through and look for any kind of references to imagery or vague allusions to specific events and try to kind of reverse engineer it.
Right.
So you then think, well, imagine he actually was watching a gladiatorial match in the Colosseum, and while he's watching it, he's thinking these thoughts about it, and then that kind of extrapolates.
It's this forensic philosophy, reconstructing reconstruct
it. And then there's one or two scenes where we had to have a discussion that was kind of a bit like exposition or whatever. It wasn't really related to what was going on in the scene, and the way we dealt with that was to have action that unfolded in the scene that wasn't directly related to dialogue, but that paralleled it symbolically. So for instance, we had this one where they're talking about philosophy or politics or whatever, and we said, let's set it at the Circus Maximus, and there'll be a chariot race that they're watching while they're having this conversation, and then we can see the chariots crashing and things, and it makes it more visually interesting.
Right.
And this can vaguely parallel the kind of building tension in the dialogue or whatever, because otherwise it would just be two guys standing talking, and that's boring to watch, right? So that's like a trick of the trade, as it were, is like, how do you make this conversation more interesting? Like, you put it in an environment where there's action unfolding in the background, if there's not action like happening in the conversation itself. So yeah, we learned some tricks, and we made this graphic novel. I'll tell you, the other weird thing about publishing is it's all out of sync. So at the moment we did the book launch, and I have to promote it and I talk about it and stuff. But since I wrote that book, I've already written another book, and I'm now in the middle of writing the one after that.
My goodness.
So yeah, so it kind of gets a little bit out of sync. So people are like, the last book you wrote, and I'm like, which one is the last? Like, this one I'm supposed to be talking about at the moment. And so after that, I wrote a prose biography of Marcus Aurelius for Yale University Press, which is also weird because it seems back to front, right? So it seems like it would make more sense to do the kind of prose biography and then think, okay, how do we visualize this?
Right.
Having gone into details, but having visualized it, I then had to write a biography that goes more academically into the comparing the sources and weighing them up and stuff like that. And I think from both of them, though, I kind of learned more stuff, and they changed my perception of Marcus Aurelius.
Are you breaking away from Marcus in your future books? Because you've had a lot of you've been Marcus heavy for a while.
I've written 3 books in a row. I've written 3.5 books about Marcus Aurelius. I wrote How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, Verissimus, and then this biography of him for Yale's Ancient Life series. So 3 books that are very heavily about Marcus, a self-help book, a graphic novel, and a prose biography. But I also edited an edition of the Meditations and wrote a biographical essay at the beginning of it. And I also wrote 1 or 2, possibly 1 book chapter for the Cambridge companion to the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which I don't know, that is going to come out next year or something, presumably. It's edited by John Sellers. So I also wrote a chapter for that about Marcus Aurelius. So it's kind of almost like 3.5. But the book I'm writing at the moment is about Socrates.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. Now I have a question. Forgive me if it's been a while since I read How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. I need to get back in. But I believe there are some parallels to the way it's laid out as in Verissimus. If I remember correctly, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor starts with his deathbed, and so does Verissimus. Is there a reason, or is that coincidence, or is it a strategy of yours, or what's going on there?
Well, it's a deliberate strategy. The first time I did it, and then the second time I did it, it was because I couldn't come up with a better deliberate strategy. So I thought I'll just do the same thing again. And that seems, people don't seem to have minded that too much. That's the sort of thing that you do, and you think people are going to complain about that, and nobody ever does. You think, I just did the same for the framing story twice, and they're like, no, that's all right. It's just we thought this guy's face looked a bit squishy.
But on page 7, the feather he's using is a turkey feather, not a quail feather.
Yeah. So there was that. The first time I did it, when I was writing How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, the problem was that the beginning of Marcus's life is almost like a training montage. It's all what we mainly know is about his education, and it kind of doesn't make sense to start the story there, because we haven't kind of got to sympathize with the character enough,
right,
to then care about his education. So it just doesn't really work in terms of the structure. And so I thought we need to kind of begin with something that draws the reader in a lot more and makes them care more about character. And then we can go, and this is how he was educated and became a Stoic philosopher and stuff. So the one way to do that is have a framing story. It's not a particularly novel idea, but it fits Marcus's story, that we start with his death, and then we can kind of return to conclude that. The problem I had when I was writing How to Think Like a Roman Emperor was I knew that that's where we'd start. And then I thought, but he's already died, so I'm not really sure how we're going to end the book. We can kind of go back to that scene, but it's finished. So I thought, well, the only way around that is technically we could go back to the scene and retell the same scene from a different perspective, like Commodus's perspective or something. I thought nobody wants to know Commodus's perspective. It's going to be a rubbish perspective. It's not going to be a very good perspective to end the book on. But I thought, well, there is another perspective that we know about Marcus's death. We know quite a lot about the external circumstances of it from the Roman histories, but we can reasonably imagine what his attitudes and beliefs would have been like, what his internal dialogue might have been like, because he talks a lot about his own death in the Meditations. Right. So why not just imagine that that's what he's actually thinking as he's lying in his deathbed? I guess it would be, right? It seems reasonable to extrapolate. So we kind of went back and we did that. And we did something similar to that, but a little bit different in Verissimus. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was why we made that decision. That was, I guess, a strategy that we employed so the story could work.
Well, talking about that training montage that you go to after the framing story, what family was Marcus born into? What would he have become if a certain emperor had not taken notice of him? Like, what would his trajectory have been like if?
Oh, he would have been one of the most senior statesmen in Rome. He would have been like a consul. He would probably have been a consul twice. Like sometimes, like the internet's full of misinformation and
Sure.
stuff, right? So one of the things that people occasionally say, my favorite one is people say on the internet that we don't know anything about Marcus Aurelius' life, which is just like, no, they just don't know that we know stuff. Like we have, like, he was a big deal, but he was kind of famous. Like, so we do know something. Like, we've got 3 histories of his reign, and then inscriptions and like references and other texts. We've got a cache of his private letters. We have his legal rescripts or references to them. We've got a lot of information. We know more about his life than we do about almost any other ancient philosopher, actually. So sometimes people say he was like an obscure family. He was kind of a nobody, and then he was brought into limelight. That's not true at all. His family were extremely they weren't, the history of his family isn't well known, but his grandfather was twice consul, and on his father's side, and his maternal grandfather or maternal great grandfather was thrice consul. So the consul's kind of hard to describe. We don't have an exact equivalent today, but it's a little bit like a prime minister-ish.
Okay.
So someone that's twice or thrice consul is maybe like someone that served 2 or 3 terms in office as a prime minister. So someone that's at 3 terms as prime minister is like one of the most senior statesmen, like, and he on both sides of his family. So what's said about Marcus is his father died when Marcus was, we think, about 4 years old, and he died at the rank of praetor, which is below consul. And the reason that that's emphasized, sometimes the Roman histories are kind of tricky to read in a way, because, and Roman writing in general, because often they'll insinuate things, and you kind of learn a bit after a while, like they're saying things, what's unsaid is important. Right? So here's a good example. Like if you read a speech where somebody is praising somebody by a Roman orator, like often what they're actually doing is slagging somebody else off by implication. So if they say the new emperor is so intelligent and so merciful, what they actually mean is the previous emperor was stupid and cruel. Like, and everybody knew that. Like, the audience were quite sensitive to things like that. So when we're told that Marcus's father died at this low rank, I think that's really meant to kind of flag up to us that he was expected to progress to the rank of consul. And so therefore Marcus was put in this situation where the only reason that he's not the son of a consul was because his father died suddenly before he had an opportunity to. But otherwise, it would have been more obvious that he came from a line of senior statesmen.
So then Marcus is it's kind of complicated. He's adopted by the adopted son of Hadrian or something like that.
So Roman genealogies are kind of like sometimes Spaghetti Junction or something, like they're weird, and you're like, but that's his sister, and like, you know, like, is it his sister or his like daughter or his like, what is going on here? Like, so they get really complicated. I had to draw some for the last book I did, and I was like, can we split this into several parts? Because it's just too complicated. A good example of that is that Marcus Aurelius had an adoptive brother called Lucius Verus, but he was 9 years younger than Marcus, and he married Marcus's daughter. So he was also Marcus's son-in-law, like, as well as being his brother.
Right.
And I think he was perceived by, we're kind of told by one of the historians that Lucius Verus was actually perceived as being like Marcus's son. Like, that's kind of how he interacted with him or presented him, although that's not how we usually describe him today. So his relationship to Hadrian, actually, technically, is that Hadrian groomed Marcus to be a successor. It's Hadrian's was crazy, and so his succession plans were like a dog's breakfast. But as far as he really does look like, it's pretty clear that from a very early age, Marcus was being groomed for some sort of very important position. He had honors like heaped on him. He was being prepared for something like this. And then eventually he was appointed, he was adopted by Antoninus Pius, who was adopted by Hadrian. And Hadrian actually legally adopted Marcus as his grandson to make the succession clear. So Hadrian technically is Marcus's grandfather in Roman law. And also related to him in other ways.
It's complicated.
Through spaghetti junction of relationships. That's another reason he wasn't completely obscure. Not only was his family kind of senior statesman, but Marcus was also kind of related to Hadrian. And he was also Marcus's mother was extremely wealthy. She owned she was like a construction magnate, weirdly, like a construction magnate. Yeah, like archaeologists have found all these bricks with our name printed on them. And the histories confirm that. One of the cool things about history is when you read the texts, and historians are often like, oh, I don't know if we can really believe this, because a lot of these texts are quite unreliable, but then they'll find something that they dig out of the ground that actually seems to corroborate or somehow ties up with what's in their book. And that's always a bit of a shock in a way.
Right.
You think, wow, really? That was actually... So I'll give you a good example of that is Marcus. We think the textual evidence from the Meditations, I would say, suggests that Marcus probably wrote it between 170 and about like late 174 AD, roughly. And he says that he's at Carnuntum in Austria while writing part of it. And at Carnuntum, I asked the director of archaeology, have you found anything that might in any way kind of shed light on Marcus's history? And he said, yeah, we found a funerary stone or stele for a Praetorian, a member of the Praetorian Guard, like so Marcus's personal cohort or bodyguard. And it was dated 171 AD. And they said it's extremely unlikely that a Praetorian would have been there unless the emperor was also there. So that allows us to kind of drive a stake into the ground and go, Marcus was at Carnuntum in 171 AD. We're like 99% sure of that. And that matches up roughly with the dates that we have for the writing in the Meditations, part of which he says that he wrote there.
Right.
So this is what it's like kind of doing history. You're kind of like, oh, wow, these things actually line up. Stop. It's amazing that any of this information is accurate, really.
Yeah, it's like detective work and then artistry all combining. Yeah, that's amazing. So eventually Marcus becomes emperor. This is in Verissimus. Everyone should check it out, by the way. And then his then Lucius, is it Lucius? Is that how we're saying? Okay, Lucius is made then co-emperor by Marcus shortly thereafter. Had that ever been done before?
No. Yeah, or yes and no. Right, let's do a deep dive. So it's the first time it had been done officially, but it had been done. So I'll confuse everybody here, but I hope in a constructive way by saying the guy that we call a Roman emperor, like our word emperor arguably isn't quite the right word to describe what the office of the Roman emperor actually was. So Augustus invented the office of emperor, and it consists actually of about 4 or 5 different titles and powers that are combined together in one man. The Romans were adamant that the emperor wasn't a monarch, like a king, and technically he was elected or acclaimed by the legions. So there's a couple of kind of peculiarities about the way that the office works. It's kind of different from what we would think of as a king or an emperor in the normal sense, and also different Roman emperors kind of fulfilled the role in different ways. Some of them viewed themselves more as a servant of the people, like Marcus and Antoninus, and some of them were more autocratic, like Nero and Commodus, who viewed it more like like a dictatorship or something like that, like one-man rule. So Marcus was the first person to appoint someone else as Augustus, to give them the title Augustus, and which is the main title that's associated with being an emperor, at the same time that he took power. However, previous emperors had handed over other powers. Like there's a power called the tribunician power that allows you to veto acts of the Senate. And this is really the guts, like the main legal power that an emperor has. And Marcus acquired that about, I think, 14 years earlier. Like, so while Marcus was Caesar to Antoninus Pius for 23 years, and then he ruled as emperor himself for 19 years. So during this really long apprenticeship that he had, partway through it, Antoninus granted Marcus a number of power. He also made him imperator, which is like supreme commander of the military as well. So you could say that Marcus was virtually a co-emperor alongside Antoninus Pius. I think it was like 14 years before the end of his rule, and then he acquired the title of Augustus on top of that and became more fully emperor. And he appointing Lucius Verus co-emperor wasn't a completely novel idea, but Marcus went a little bit further.
I got you.
The other precedent for it was back in the realms of mythology or legend. The Romans believed that the earliest kings that ruled Rome had been overthrown. Tarquin the Proud was the last Roman king. He was overthrown and replaced with two consuls that governed the Senate. And the consuls ruled the Senate together. We talked about the consuls earlier, but they could veto each other. So the idea was that was kind of a safeguard against either one of them becoming like a dictator. And so Marcus's idea of having co-emperors looks like it's obviously inspired by this idea of having two consuls in the Senate. How effective that was, it's kind of as a way of preventing autocracy, is debatable. But at least it probably at least kind of gave the appearance that he was willing to
sure
power.
Yeah, but those two, at least how they're presented in Verissimus, they couldn't be more different individuals. You have a great couple of pages focusing on the choice of Hercules, and I felt like Marcus chose one and Lucius chose the other path. And I don't know, you want to talk a bit about the character of Lucius?
Well, one of the challenges, actually, I'll say two kind of related things. It's when people visualize Marcus Aurelius, I believe that people often visualize, and I'll say this, I started saying this out loud recently, and then people were like nodding, and I was like, I was right. So I was going, I think a lot of you guys, when you visualize Marcus Aurelius, just see this guy in his chamber late at night, in his own, in private, with by lamplight, just kind of writing the meditations or whatever. And you think of him as a kind of lonely figure in a way, or kind of a bit and isolated. But and that's kind of how he comes across a bit in the text of the meditations itself. But when we look at the Roman histories, we actually, one way of understanding a person's character, especially if you're doing biography, is what are the constellation of people like who surround them? Like, who you spend your life around day in, day out kind of defines your character to some extent. And Marcus was surrounded by this sort of ensemble cast of crazy, like colorful, extreme. And so from a kind of literary point of view, one of the odd things about the Roman histories is they have to describe Marcus in a way that's almost a little bit bland, right? So he's just kind of very rational and very impassive and stuff like that. So, but that makes him come across a little bit as a kind of colorless character. And perhaps for that reason, the authors, particularly of the Historia Augusta, but maybe also to some extent our other sources, tend to really play up the colorful nature for contrast, right? So some scholars have said, well, maybe this is a literary device that his brother is clearly described as being like the complete opposite
Right,
of Marcus, right? And it's to kind of make Marcus's character more defined, like in opposition to this. So there's a debate that maybe Lucius Verus wasn't. He's basically comes across like a playboy. He seems like they virtually label him as an alcoholic. It's
right.
quite clear that they're insinuating that he's an alcoholic and he's addicted to gambling and he's a layabout and he doesn't take his duties responsibly. But he's extremely popular as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of got the common touch in some ways, in a way that Marcus maybe didn't have at first. And he's really into sports. So that is one of the things. He loves the chariot races. He loves the gladiatorial contests. And that makes him quite popular with the Roman people. They associate him with their entertainment in a sense. So it's very, very different from Marcus. That said, and by the way, there's a really good biography of Lucius Verus that came out a few years ago, that tried to defend him and say his character, it's propaganda that's kind of distorted his character. I disagree with that, though, because I think there is evidence in the sources that kind of suggests there's at least some validity. I mean, one of them is we have a letter that Lucius Verus himself wrote to Fronto, Marcus's rhetoric tutor, where he basically tells Fronto to write this kind of propaganda piece.
Yeah.
He asked him to write a history of the Parthian War, where he straight up says that he wants him to kind of write it, cook the books, and play up his own role in it to make it more heroic. And you think that doesn't sound like something Marcus would have done, and Marcus never does that in any of these letters. So it does look like Lucius was more kind of egotistical, more vain. We just, and those are their private letters. So we don't know if all the other stuff that we read is accurate, but even little bits of more direct evidence like that are consistent with the idea that maybe this guy didn't care about philosophical virtue as much, and was a bit more egotistical about the way that he saw himself as emperor.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And then eventually he dies, eventually. Then we're going to meet Commodus, of course, as the book moves on. But how did one thing I noticed is the book really made it clear. Verissimus made it clear is Marcus did not have an easy time of being an emperor. There was a lot of crap that happened. There was one conflict after another. It was pretty amazing.
If that's how it comes across, Cassius Dio concludes his chapter on Marcus Aurelius by more or less saying the same thing. He says, Marcus Aurelius wasn't the most successful of emperors, but I particularly admire him because of the challenges that he had to contend with, and that he did so with like wisdom or virtue or whatever, and he preserved the empire through much troubles. And that's like a pretty accurate. Cassius Dio was a senator during the rule of Commodus, so he had kind of almost firsthand knowledge of those times, and then he says the Roman Empire descended from a period of gold into one of rust, and he just completely trashes Commodus, again going from one extreme to another.
Right.
But he, I think, Marcus had a lot of misfortune. I mean, it's really interesting to try and it almost looks like the gods just decided, okay, let's test this guy out, and throw everything at him.
It's like the book of Job. It's like kind of like the book of Job, like you're going to test you here, we're going to test you there, we're going to kill most of your children. It's just amazing how many misfortunes occur. One of the worst things, well, it's all relative, but like one of the things that no one ever really mentions that happened, again, because I think it's kind of insinuated in the histories, the river Tiber flooded at the beginning of Marcus's reign as emperor. And you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then there was a famine that followed it, which is it's kind of what you would have expected. But what they don't say is that the Romans personified Father Tiber as a kind of a god. Basically, it's common to imagine that the spirits or gods inhabited rivers, Tiber in particular. And if it flooded, it was a complete mess. There would be like sewage and
dead animals and stud buildings would crumble and things. It was chaos, right? And it would go on for like the cleanup would take months. But the Romans would very much interpreted that not a good omen, like as
Not a good thing.
a bad omen regarding the emperor. And that things like that can really damage the standing of an emperor. So I think Marcus, that was a big problem. Like that would have caused a lot of gossip about, well, like this guy's only just taken the throne, and then this happens. Like the gods clearly hate this guy. There's something's wrong here. And so Marcus was lucky that he went through so much misfortune, but still managed to maintain the support of the Roman people as far as we can see. He was still quite popular. Maybe there are explanations for that, but it's surprising because they would naturally have thought the gods disapprove of this ruler.
Yeah. I mean, we can see things today when there's an election and then something bad happens. Oh, it's the president. This is not supernatural stuff, just like economies and things. And they're now unpopular. Whereas at least. Well, now though, I guess we could argue that major climate problems could be blamed on our elected officials at some level. That's I hadn't thought of that. So Marcus is in the north, but then eventually he is. What I found interesting in your book is as time goes on, you can see him becoming more and more ill and frail looking, which I hadn't ever envisioned before. It was very clear in the book.
We see that in his sculptures, and that is what's really interesting about that is Augustus. So, bit of trivia, like the statues of Augustus, the first Roman emperor, all look the same. Because although Augustus lived to be, if I remember rightly, in his 70s or something like that, or more, all of his statues depict him in the prime of life. And that was a deliberate propaganda decision.
Right.
He deliberately chose to have himself depicted in his prime. Marcus does not do that. Like we have statues of Marcus as a small boy, we have him in the prime of life, and then we have statues where he looks quite frail and kind of haggard and elderly. We also have statues of him where he's depicted wearing plain clothes and not in military regalia, dressed as an emperor. So he seems more willing to portray himself as kind of vulnerable or to humanize himself more. I maybe I'm just imagining this as well, but I wrote in my biography for Yale about, who knows what we can read into the statues of Marcus. But if you look at them, the ones of him later in life, to me, kind of look more grave, more serious. Like this guy has seen a lot of stuff. Like the earlier ones, he's either kind of raising an eyebrow as if he's thinking about some problem, or he's kind of gazing wistfully into the distance, which is kind of an unusual pose. He's dreamy, this kind of dreamy sort of faraway look in his eyes, like a philosopher. And then the later ones, he looks like a general. Like he looks like he's been through a plague and a bunch of wars and stuff like that. He's kind of like looking dead set ahead, as if he's kind of just come out of a total carnage.
trying his best to get through each day. So the plagues hit. He's ill, possibly with some plague symptoms, and then the rumor is spread that perhaps he's on his deathbed or dying. And then we've used was it Cassius? I don't know the last name. The usurper who
Avidius Cassius.
There you go. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Has himself declared emperor by part of the empire anyway.
Yeah, so people might not know that you can do that. It's an option. All you need is a legion, right?
Well,
so
I'll get on that.
Technically, again, because the way this works is a bit differently from what we would think of as a king or an emperor. A legion can acclaim somebody as an emperor. They just say Ave Imperator, and they all so basically say we're designating you the emperor. It wasn't an election. Like the generals would have said, like, clap now, right? Right. You're electing this guy. But and so the power base of the Roman emperor, in a sense, was meant to be the legions. He was supreme commander. The word emperor we get from imperator, which means supreme commander in chief.
Okay.
But you can have several people could hold that title at once, and this guy Avidius Cassius had himself declared emperor in that sense, and then he assumed other titles. He put together his own praetorian, his own bodyguard.
Wow.
And essentially pretty much had a breakaway empire in the east of the Roman Empire. He had 7 legions under his command.
So that being said, now I think I shall now declare that my listeners are now are the legion. We'll call them the legion. And if they want to declare, Donald or I emperor, go for it.
Emperors. I'll split it with you. 50/50.
All right, that sounds great. I appreciate that. I don't know which one shall I booze it up, or shall you? How do you want to handle that?
We'll do it. We use social media to we'll base it on likes or something.
Oh yes, that's the Stoic way.
Yeah. Right. And then, so that's what happened. And then obviously, they had a civil war. The real problem, well, not the real, one of the problems, the Romans really, really hated civil wars. They had a lot of them. So they had a lot of civil wars, and they hated civil wars. I have a theory that I think it's a pretty plausible theory that people say, why did Marcus appoint Commodus? I think part of it is that we're kind of looking at it the wrong way around. The main concern of the Senate and people in general throughout the empire was to avoid civil war, because that was by far their biggest concern. Particularly if you live in the provinces, then you don't necessarily care that much if the emperor is an idiot, because it doesn't really affect you.
It's way over there.
He's in Rome. He executed a bunch of senators, but that's not my problem. But if there's a civil war, it becomes your problem. Because everybody gets conscripted into the legions, and you end up having battles taking place in the provinces, and the whole thing starts to crumble. So people in general were like, I think we'd rather have this complete clown in charge than have a civil war. And so that boils down to, we cannot have rival contenders for the throne. If there's a situation where there might be, some of them are going to have to be killed, assassinated or whatever. And so this is some people say, well, why didn't Marcus appoint someone else as his successor? Because Commodus would have had to have been, probably would have been expected to have been assassinated if that had happened.
Right.
Because then you'd obviously you've got the beginnings of a schism then. And we see that happening with Avidius Cassius. Very easily, the empire breaks into east and west. And it's hard to kind of prevent that from happening. So I think Marcus thought, a bad emperor is better than a civil war. And the Senate, we're told, by the way, who knows really what's going on here? And it's such a complex question. There are different ways of interpreting it. But one of the things I'd point out to people when they're trying to kind of weigh this up is that, at least if we can trust our sources, which we can't, but if we could, the Historia Augusta says it was actually Lucius Verus that insisted that Commodus was appointed Caesar, and they had it done when he was at the beginning of the Marcomannic War, if I remember rightly. It was at the end of the Parthian War, beginning of the Marcomannic War, and also Commodus and his brother were both appointed Caesar. So clearly the plan was that they were going to rule together, but the brother died quite young. And so Commodus was Marcus's only male successor at that point. So if he'd said, actually, do you know what? You step to one side, we're going to return to the bench, we're going to have one of our generals as Caesar, Commodus would have eventually just attracted a faction who were wanting to break away, or so he'd always be in the wings. As you can't have that. He would be like a death sentence, effectively. The real question would be, if Marcus Aurelius wanted to kind of avoid this, what he should just not have had children in the first place.
Yeah.
And then he could have chosen his successor more freely.
So they averted the civil war eventually, and you can see how in Verissimus. And then they eventually Faustina, is that how I say, passes away as well, while they're kind of touring the empire a bit, right? And then they I believe after that, if I have my timeline right, is it Commodus and Marcus that are what's the word I want? Not indoctrinated, but they joined the cult of Demeter on their way back through. Is it both of them, or is it just Marcus? I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure it's both of them. It's definitely Marcus. Commodus was with him. From what I recollect, Commodus was initiated into the cult of Eleusis.
Initiated. That's the word I wanted.
And I think it would have been. I don't know if we know for sure that it was at that time, but it probably was. And
from my understanding, that's maybe some of Marcus's imagery may be tied into that about fruits ripening and falling. And
I mean, that's a tricky one, but we don't. The mystery religions, by the name, means secret. So we don't know much about the mystery religions, but the cult of Demeter or the Eleusinian mysteries were like one of the main religious sects in the ancient world. They were really the main religious sect in ancient Athens. Just out the Eleusis is like an hour drive from Athens, just outside Athens, and it's very wealthy. People traveled from all over the world there, and the cult had something to do with the afterlife, living virtuously, but also Demeter, because she's the goddess of the harvest and grain. It has to do with the symbolism of things living and dying and the cycles of nature. So a lot of the references to nature, a lot of the metaphors to do with figs and corn, which are sacred to Demeter, and Stoic literature in general, and including Marcus Aurelius, can come across like, you could say we don't know for sure that that's what's inspired them, but one thing we could say for sure is that when Marcus uses that kind of imagery, anyone else, he himself and anyone else hearing it, would inevitably have thought that kind of seems to echo the symbolism of the Eleusinian mysteries. And it may be that he's even kind of alluding to that indirectly. So there's some parallel. The Eleusinian mysteries promise some kind of afterlife, which the Stoics don't really.
Right.
But there's that aside, there are a lot of parallels. And historically, the initiation into the ceremonies that led to initiation took place over several days, and they begin in Athens, and then they proceed to Eleusis, and it began in front of the Stoic school, in front of the Stoicoikale. So the initiates would gather facing the Stoic school, or where the Stoic school happened to be. Sure. And they'd begin all these ceremonies, and it would end up at Eleusis. So there was this kind of connection in terms of the actual building and the location.
Well, I can't recommend the book enough. The illustrations are beautiful. You all have to look for the weird snake puppet image when you get the book.
That's one of my favorites.
I think we should make one of those for the next conference.
Remember I was saying earlier about Architect. So our source for that is a satirist, right? So one of the weird things about history is that some of our sources are not entirely serious. Right, so we have satires. Some of our sources for Diogenes the Cynic are satires. So we're like, should we believe this, or is it just meant as a joke? Or so Lucian says that there was this cult of Glycon, and it was like this weird puppet thing that was like a snake, but it had human ears and long hair. And people would go and pay lots of money to get prophecies from oracles. And you might read that and think that sounds like it's made up. It sounds like he's joking. Surely nobody would fall for this nonsense. It's obvious the guy's obviously a charlatan. But apart from, we have some other references to it in other texts, but we have archaeological evidence. We have coins that commemorate the founder of the cult.
Wow.
And then we have several statues. One is in the Museum of the Ancient Agora in Athens, in the Stoa of Attalus, the building is called. They have a small statue of Glycon. So we find the archaeological evidence. We're like, no way, that thing that looked like it was a joke.
the Muppets gone wild. Yeah.
Apparently, like these people actually did worship a sock puppet, snake-headed thing with human ears.
Now, in case I wasn't clear, that is for the listeners. That's different from the cult of Demeter that we mentioned before. This is a separate group. And yeah, you'll have to check out the awesome illustrations of that in Verissimus. Was just going back to Commodus for a moment. We all know how that went down, but was Commodus groomed for as long as Marcus was for the throne, or was it more haphazard?
We don't really get as much information about his upbringing. He died, like we're told by one historian that Marcus put a lot of effort into bringing the best teachers that he could find from across the empire to tutor Commodus. So if we can take that at face value, and that's kind of what we would expect Marcus to do. So you'd think. And then one of the explanations we have is that Commodus we're told he wasn't a naturally vicious or wicked person, but that he was kind of gullible and easily swayed. And so he was surrounded by hangers-on who kind of manipulated him. Fell in with a bad crowd.
Right.
And they persuaded him to come back to Rome and kind of live like a celebrity. And I think he also began to drink heavily and became obsessed with his public image and kind of went a little bit crazy. That's another thing, is like we're told that he started to think that he was a god, and he would dress as Hercules. And we have statues of him as well, dressed in the pelt of the Nemean lion. Like he's dressed as Hercules. So again, the archaeological evidence confirms something that looks like it's maybe an exaggeration,
right,
in the texts. But yeah, he did go around seemingly pretending that he was Hercules. He did a lot of other strange things as well.
And you mentioned at the end of the book, where you have sort of an afterword, that your view of Commodus has shifted a bit after working on this text.
I think the thing about Commodus is, what struck me when I was working on this, one of the things that struck me is, I think Commodus must have been very scared as a youth. That if I try and really imagine his situation in the lead up to the Civil War and during the Civil War, he was probably really afraid that he was about to be assassinated, killed. I think there was obviously a rift between him and Marcus about whether the people involved in the Civil War should be executed or not. And Marcus pardoned them, and allegedly even protected some of them from persecution. Whereas we're told that as soon as Marcus died, one of the first things that Commodus did was to reverse that decision and have them hunted down and burned alive as traitors. So I trace that back to Commodus being 14 years old at the outbreak of the Civil War and being alone in Rome, while Marcus was in Sirmium, quite far away, and probably just suddenly thinking any one of these servants could be a would-be assassin. Like Rome itself could be about to be invaded in a civil war, and I'll be caught in the middle of it. Like I don't feel safe. And then his father saying, we're going to kind of like forgive everyone involved in this, and Commodus going, can't we just kill them all?
It's just like, cut their heads off, Dad.
They were going to kill us. Like, they were definitely going to kill us. So I think that was the kind of, part of the rift, it seems.
Yeah. All right. So before I ask you about the Plato's Academy, I'm going to give you a fluff question here. Yeah. When this becomes a animated series on Netflix or something, Who should voice Marcus Aurelius?
I tell you exactly who that should be. It's really easy. It should be Russell Crowe. Like,
All right.
because I think Russell Crowe has now matured paradoxically into looking more like Marcus Aurelius.
So that would be
Like,
animated or live action.
he
This
could
should
do a
be Russell Crowe.
live action. He's maybe like he's about the right age to play Marcus Aurelius as well, which would be kind of strange. Like he could do a prequel to Gladiator. I don't think, I kind of feel like maybe that wouldn't work. But he's older. He's about the same age as Marcus Aurelius, and he kind of looks a little bit like him. The guy that really looks like Marcus Aurelius, or used to look like him, was one of the guys that played Doctor Who, called Tom Baker.
Yeah.
And
was he the scarf one?
the guy with the big scarf. Like, if you ever see Google pictures of Tom Baker with a beard, and he's kind of got the same hair and stuff, and he's got very similar. He's got the eyes. He has Marcus Aurelius's eyes. Like, he's the dead spit of Marcus, and Marcus Aurelius has quite distinctive features.
Sure.
Right. So, but he's too old now to play Marcus. If we could have gone back a few decades.
Was Marcus in his 50s when he died?
He's 59.
59. Of course, that might be an old 59. My grandfather died when he was 70, and he looked like he was 90 in the 80s. So who knows what Marcus looked like?
Yeah, and some of the statues of him, he looks like he's pushing 70 or something. Like, he definitely looks older than 59 in some of the statues. Maybe they're just a bit weathered or something. But
hard life.
It'd be really cool if Russell Crowe. Apparently, here's some movie. I love movie trivia stuff as well. I'll tell you 2 bits of total random movie trivia.
All right.
Apparently, Russell Crowe was interested in the Meditations and had a quote from the Meditations on his wall that's kind of inspired him. That I think is used in the movie. I can't remember exactly what it says now, but he apparently wanted there to be more references to the Meditations. I read in an interview somewhere in Gladiator.
Yeah,
like he wanted more references, but the script was kind of written ad hoc once they started filming and stuff, and it's only got like 2 or 3 sort of vague references to the Meditations. So they're now making Gladiator 2.
Really?
It's being greenlit by the studio, and it follows the life of the character that they call Lucius, who is Marcus Aurelius's grandson in the movie rather than his adopted brother. He's the kid, like in Gladiator. So he grows up. And I'm kind of hoping that means he'll maybe have kind of memories or references back to Marcus Aurelius. So there might be
squeeze some meditations in there,
some more stoicism in the sequel, perhaps. There's also more movie trivia. There's a movie that's coming out very soon called On the Creation of Earthquakes, which stars John Malkovich as Seneca. Apparently, I only read this in one article, but apparently it's a black comedy about Seneca's relationship with Nero. I think I would cast John Malkovich as Seneca. I think he'd make an excellent Seneca. That's a really good decision, actually. But there's another bit of trivia for you, which is there's a famous scene, like sometimes the Roman historians write stuff and they clearly geek out. So Cassius Dio writes about this battle, and the way he phrases it is he actually says the Romans at one point fought the Sarmatians on the Danube, and he says, and he goes, and I don't mean in the water, I mean on the frozen surface of the river. So like the way he introduces it, it's like he teases it, and he obviously thinks, how cool is that? And he goes on this kind of digression to explain this particular battle. And we have that in Verissimus, but I think anyone then reading that is like they fought them on this frozen surface, like in an ice rink, like on the frozen surface, and he explains tactically exactly how they did it, and it's really cool.
You think hockey's rough? Wait for this.
Yeah,
right?
Like imagine having a cavalry charge at you, like a bunch of heavy lancers, like. So he says, and he says things like the ice was awash with blood, and everyone was slipping on it because it was all blood and ice, and it's crazy, right? Now they were going to use that scene in Gladiator because they were like, "This is awesome,"
right?
But they couldn't figure out how to fit it into the story, and so the same scriptwriter then worked on a movie called King Arthur with Clive Owen in it, and they recycled this unused scene that comes from the histories of Marcus Aurelius that they couldn't use in Gladiator, and they've used a version of it in this other Sword and Sandals movie that came out like 10 years later or whatever.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Bit of trivia.
Yeah, movie trivia with Donald. You should have a podcast, Donald.
Sword and Sandals movie trivia.
So, moving away from Verissimus, which, by the way, is out and available at bookstores and online, and you have to check it out. It's a great, it's a work of art and philosophy and biography all in one. It's pretty amazing. But you're also involved now in this Plato's Academy Center, I believe is the proper title. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, people say to me, that they didn't even realize that there was anything at the original location of Plato's Academy, or where is it, and stuff like that. And it's a large public park. So the academy was what the Greeks called the gymnasium originally, and that we use that term to mean a building, but they use it to mean something that I would say is better described as a recreational park.
Okay,
like a recreational grounds with a racetrack and a kind of running track and wrestling schools, libraries, shrines, areas for people to walk in. So it's like a big park with a bunch of stuff going on in it, outside just outside the city walls of Athens. And there were several in Athens. And so the academy was one of the main ones. And then Plato went there and he set up his school of philosophy there. He'd walk around teaching philosophy. He seems to have had a house there. He was buried there. His tomb was there. And so for like mid-centuries, this was like the first major academic institution in Western history. Now it's a public park now, and there are ruins of some of the buildings that are still there. And it's in one of the poorer suburbs of Athens. So I went there and I was kind of looking around the ruins and stuff like that and checking out the park. And I thought, how come there aren't any tourists here? Like it's all just local Greeks, like walking their dogs and they're taking their kids to play and jogging and stuff like that. There's like a little museum there, a museum of Plato.
Okay.
There's a statue of Plato, some other bits and pieces. But I thought, how come there's not an international conference center here? There should be. And then, like, if there was an international conference center, that would bring foreign revenue and investment.
Sure.
The area. So I started talking to people on podcasts about that. And then people started emailing me and saying, so when are you going to build it? And I thought, well, I don't really know much about building conference centers. But luckily, one of my friends does. He's a surveyor and he's an expert in these kind of projects. So we put together a proposal and we started talking to various institutions in Athens, and we incorporated as a non-profit. And the 1st of January, it took us a while to get that done, but we've been set up since 1st of January. We started building an online, a virtual community, running virtual conferences and stuff. Yeah. And doing some initial fundraising. And that's our proposal, is to build not on top of, like, adjacent to, like, facing the original location of Plato's Academy. One of the things I'd really like to do is, we know from several ancient sources what the Greek inscriptions were. There were either 2 or 3 on the side of Plato's tomb. And I'd like to maybe propose that we reinstate some kind of sculpture that commemorates the burial place of Plato, and we reinstate the original inscriptions in ancient Greek. Side of it. I think that'd be pretty cool.
That would be cool.
Go there, they would be reminded, like, this is where Plato's buried, and like, this is where he used to walk around and talk about philosophy and stuff. So
Stoicon 25, 26, is that going to be held there, do you think?
Yeah, that would be cool. We're already starting to run some events there. There's an event in September, but it's a kind of private corporate event thing about philosophy. It's actually happening in Athens over 4 days, and part of it is probably going to be in the Academia Platonos, as it's called in Greek, area. And then hopefully in 2023, I'm thinking about running some kind of literary event, like for authors, classicists, and philosophers and stuff in that area. So yeah.
So are you on the way to building an actual physical structure soon then?
Not anytime. So it's going to take a while to do that. But we've got a proposal in place, and we're in the process of speaking to various organizations. We work very closely with the American School for Classical Studies in Athens, and the general manager of it's on our board of advisors. And we have also been speaking to various senior academics and government ministers in Greece about the possibility of building a conference center. They're going to build a new museum there, which is I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Sometimes in Greece they're a little bit vague about the timeline of construction projects and things, but they have a plan to landscape the park and build a new museum there.
Okay.
And we are hoping that our project will kind of complement that or fit in with it.
Yeah, great. Well, Donald, you're a go-getter. You're writing several books at once, starting conference centers. And anything else you want to mention before we call it a day?
Yeah, just people should check out the Modern Stoicism website as well, like, because we will have StoicCon in October, November, and Stoic Week, like every year. So those things are still happening. I'm one of the founding members of the Modern Stoicism non-profit in the UK. And so if they go to modernstoicism.com, they'll find out about some of those activities. That's a good, if people are new to Stoicism, that's a good way to find out more about it.
Great. Well, Verissimus is out everywhere. You can check out the Plato's Academy Center online. I'll put links in the show description for some of that. And once again, Donald Robertson, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Carpe diem.